analytics. I've invited Hannah Mayer here, who is a local St. Louis writer and blogger. And I've asked her to just sit down with me for about 15 or so minutes and chat about how she uses analytics in her work as a writer and as a blogger. So without further ado, I'll start by asking Hannah to introduce yourself and give us a sense of your background.
Sure, thanks Rebecca. I write a blog called Skid Marks. I started it about 8 years ago when I left my job in marketing and advertising to stay home with my kids. And I started my blog as sort of a jumping off point to hopefully get published by bigger sites. And that it's been an evolution of learning, and analytics has been a big part in helping me figure out sort of directions to take and the path I need to go to kind of resonate with people in my blog too.
And it's worked. You've had great success.
Thank you.
We're excited to have you as part of the class.
Thanks.
Getting right to the point, what analytics have you found to be sort of the most useful as you reviewed posts that you write and as you think about what posts to do next?
As I mentioned, the reason that I started my blog was I never monetized it. It wasn't to necessarily make money or generate click-throughs. It was to sort of develop engaging content that it would resonate with people. So hopefully it would be shareable content that people could use to hopefully kind of build an audience to eventually, get me noticed by a bigger site. And so I'm pretty top level with my analytics. When I first started using it, I focused primarily on users. And that was my goal, was to get so many users with every post. And that was really my driving focus, was just as many people as possible, which has kind of evolved as I've gone on, because I found what is more helpful is not necessarily users, but quality users. So what I mean by that is like how long people are staying on my site. So go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was going to ask, so what counted originally as a user? Like what were you
Just a click.
at?
I was just looking for clicks. Okay. I wasn't looking at how many pages they were engaging with. I wasn't looking at how long they were staying on the site. I wasn't looking if they were new versus returning readers. I was just solely focused on how many people I could get on my site, because I thought that would resonate more with the bigger publications if I was able to say I have this many people on my site every month. But as I evolved, I sort of found what was much more valuable to me is a user who was going to stay and read and share, because I can only push my blog so far within my own little channels, but once people start sharing it and I started creating more engaging content, that's when things started to go viral. And so then I started focusing more on content that was really more engaging, I guess. So I would look at the posts where people would stay longer, and I would kind of gravitate toward those kinds of topics and write more about those to kind of get people to be more engaged and also return, because it's difficult to get a new user or reader to your site. It's a lot easier to get someone who returns, who knows you, who you have a relationship with. So to answer your question, for instance, in the screenshot, you can see the top post that's circled. I have had about 838,000 page views. But what I really like to look at, what's more important to me, is the average time spent on the page, which is 6 minutes and 41 seconds. So what that tells me is that people were really engaged with that page, and the content was something that really resonated with them. So as I went through in future posts, I tried to find kind of similar themes of this post and write about kind of ideas that I brought up here. So yeah.
Excellent. Are there maybe one or two other metrics that, as you look at that screenshot, were important to you, or the other ones that you might prioritize? Because one of the challenges with the analytics is you get so much data a lot of times on these dashboards.
Yes.
Which ones did you look at as the most important?
Okay, so the other thing that I like to look at are unique page views, because that tells me how many individual pages people are coming to the page. So, I might have had 838,000 people, but uniquely, some people come back twice or whatever. So the unique page views are important to look at as well. The bounce rate is something else that I like to look at also, because that tells me how many people are leaving my site. So the bounce rate is just sort of the ratio of people that come to your site and leave immediately. So you want your bounce rate to be low. You don't want a high bounce rate. This post did have, almost an 86% bounce rate, which isn't great. But, it's not as bad as some other. Sure. My average is 80, but this page got viewed quite a few times, so that's not bad in the grand scheme of things. So.
Well, and that's sort of like a second or third or even fourth level analytic, not necessarily the most important one, but just sort of as you're trying to get the full picture of how people behave.
Yes.
It's helpful to get a sense of that, so thank you very much.
And when you have something that's shared quite a bit, you can expect a higher bounce rate because it's new people. Somebody shared it on someone's page, they're not sure kind of what they're getting into, and they might get right into it and say, this isn't for me, and leave. But it's still interesting to see what makes people stick.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's so interesting. So tell me a little bit, as you mentioned the topics of your writing and that you're using the analytics to think about what topics are sticking with people. So can you tell me maybe a story or an instance where that came into view?
Yeah, so another thing that I like to look at when I look at my analytics are my referrals and where people are coming from whenever they get to my blog. And for the most part, it's pretty predictable. Facebook is, in terms of social media, by far and away my largest social media feeder when I look at referrals. But there's also different websites that I see, and it's helpful for me to look at websites that are referring to my blog because then I can say thank you or do a reciprocal share, which everybody always likes. So it's interesting to see like where the referrals are coming from.
Sure. I'm going to pause you for just a second.
Yeah.
The term reciprocal share. So explain what that means.
Okay, so that's a big tactic that bloggers use to grow their site. So if you find bloggers that are sort of like mind, you have the same sense of humor or write about the same topics, you sort of can share an audience. So I might write a post talking about my friend from whatever blog is really funny, and I'll put a link to her blog in my page. And so people will go to her page and they'll say, oh, it's kind of like the Netflix, if you watch this, you might also like that. So it's kind of like that on a different level. But so I'll see if someone shared my blog page, and then I'll say, oh, thank you so much for putting a link to my blog. I'd love to put a link to yours in. It's just kind of good manners. So yeah, so that's a reciprocal share is when you can do it on Facebook. You can invite your friends to like someone's page and they'll do the same. Some groups are more formalized about it. Some are just sort of, we'll help a friend out. So, but what's interesting about getting back to the referrals is you can find where people are coming from to find your page. And it can be good and it can be bad. For instance, one time I wrote a post about being a stay-at-home mom, and I was getting all this traffic on my site, so I thought, well, I'm going to go see where all these people are coming from. And a lot of it was like normal Facebook pages, but then I saw it was a lot of other chat rooms. I was getting this traffic from these chat rooms, which was super interesting. And, it was good and it was bad, but it was definitely something that sparked a conversation. And you don't want necessarily every post to be controversial, but a little bit every once in a while will sort of, comments will fuel fire, and when someone sees something that's been shared with a lot of comments, they're more interested in it. So I was able to sort of dig down a little bit and see where I was getting traffic from, and it was a lot of these chat rooms, which people are extremely engaged and we're extremely passionate about one side or the other, and so it was really interesting. I never would have known had it not been for Google Analytics that all these people are talking smack about me.
That's really funny. You don't even think of chat rooms as that.
Like around anymore?
Right.
I know. I think they call them maybe message boards.
Yeah, no, I know.
Sorry, I'm sort of Gen Xer. We call them chat rooms, but
sort of those online communities where people are kind of super users.
Yeah, and they have a lot of time to talk about things. So that's another element of analytics that has really helped shape what I write about, is seeing where my referrals are coming from, what sites people are coming from to look at my page. Because like I said, for the most part, it's Facebook or, I get a few from Twitter, but whenever another blogger shares it, it's really important that I recognize that, or if people are having a conversation. And there's been a few instances where people are having a conversation about something I wrote, and I've interjected onto their message board or onto their Facebook page or onto their website comment section and said, it's hard, you have to be very political, but it's like, you read this way, this was my intent. And a lot of times it leads to like a lifelong fan, because they're like, thanks for clarifying that, because, I didn't understand what you meant. And so they're, but like I said, had it not been for Google Analytics, you'd never have this idea that all these people are talking about this.
And you even know where to spend your time going to interject based on the referrals.
Totally.
It tells you where are the people that are sort of really coming to your site naturally.
Yes, and you can understand kind of what hot buttons to write about, or if if I'm not in the mood for controversy one week, I'll write about something simple, or if you're trying to stir the pot, I'll write about, lifeguards.
That's so funny.
So, yeah.
So, final question. What suggestions do you have or ideas do you have about how students in this class or any sort of users can just kind of stay abreast of digital analytics? What resources would you suggest?
So analytics are very complex, and where everyone needs to start is sort of what the objectives are for your site. And if it's for a company you're working for, what are their objectives, and making sure that the analytics you're focusing on directly relate to whatever objectives you have, because it can get really overwhelming because there's so many different facets and you can go down so many rabbit holes. Just to give you an example, when I was looking at installing analytics on my WordPress page, there's literally 47 pages of analytics plugins for WordPress. And I just chose the first one, and it's been helpful. But I would say that the most important thing you can do is just to get your hands dirty and either create just sort of a mock site where you can actually link analytics to that to understand how it works. Because you can watch other people do analytics, but once you actually do it yourself, you're able to just kind of understand how things work and go in all the different directions of the funhouse, because it's super interesting, and it's always like kind of opening a package in the morning. I'm like, where are people going from, how many people? But it's just that continuing education, because every day things change. There's so many things that are in beta testing right now with analytics, and I mean, there's all sorts of new tools that are coming out, and it's super important to understand it, because even if you're not directly involved with analytics at your company, there's some aspect that will be helpful for you to understand, probably at some point or another, to specifically like in the marketing world, to understand, to help shape a strategy.
It's funny you mentioned that about the test accounts, because for some of the social media analytics that we've been doing in this class, I encourage students to create a test account to link it to one of those external analytics, because that way you can kind of test it and feel less concerned that it's going to go out to all of your followers because it's a different account. So that I think is a really helpful strategy.
Because that's part of what I'm afraid of with these 47 pages. I'm like, what if I uninstall this and install the new one, and then everything is just like, so it's hard to keep testing stuff on your own site, because you have readers, and if you have a glitch or something goes wrong, then you have to sort of do some damage control. But a test account, just doing it yourself and just spending time on it, getting familiar with it, because once you understand how it works, and if you do have an actual site, or your company has a site with objectives, kind of understanding which are most helpful, and then it just sort of becomes habit and a tool that you use every day in your toolbox.
So thank you very much for coming in today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I think it's really important in a class on analytics to talk to people that are using them every day to make decisions, because this is what organizations are doing. They're using analytics, they're looking at them to make decisions about what's going to come up next. So thank you so much for coming in today.